Every week we do a Q&A with interesting and accomplished members of the adaptive community to find how they persevered, how they innovated, how they built communities, and how they found solutions. Welcome to the Nametags Chat Podcast. Welcome to the Nametags Chat Podcast, where we talk with interesting and accomplished members of the adaptive community. Today we have Keith Gabel, who's a three-time Paralympian, a two-time Paralympic medalist, one silver, one bronze. We might be talking to him because he might be wanting to complete that set. A 2019 gold medalist in the World Championships, 2015 X Games gold medalist. I was also nominated for an ESPY as the best male athlete with a disability. Keith, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, brother. Stoked to be here.
This is awesome. It's so cool. I mean, you've been around for a while. I see the silver and the bronze. Are you sticking around to try to get a gold in Cortina? Is that what we're looking at right now?
Yeah, man. I can honestly say I wasn't happy with my results for the first time ever when we competed in Beijing and got to complete that set. I was going for it in Beijing. I got 2 7th places, which to me was just not quite where I wanted to be, obviously. And really, I only had myself to blame. And so, as you know, when you go through that media corral, everybody goes, "What's next? What's next?" And in my head, I'm like, I've just been planning for today. I last 4 years has been a build up to today. I have no idea. So my wife and I, we took a little bit of time, went and spent some time on a beach in Costa Rica for a couple of weeks with the kiddo, and really talked about the future and kind of what we wanted to do, what I wanted to do. And I'm not ready to hang it up yet. I'm still competitive at heart. I'm still competitive on snow. And, you know, I'm training super hard. I've got a new fire lit within me that I haven't had in a long time. So I'm super stoked for this next quad, you know.
That's awesome, especially at the end of your career. Where does that come from, that fire? And where does that come from? And then you also have to, if you don't mind, explain what the sports that you do, snowboard, cross, and bank slalom are.
Sure.
Please.
So first question, where does that fire come from? I don't know. I've always been super competitive. I'm somebody who, you know, I can't say I'm 100% self-made. I don't think anybody is. It takes a village in a sense. Everything from financially to coaching to opportunities, whether it's sharing your story or training. But on the other end of that spectrum, I am self-made. I came from literally nothing. A super poverty-stricken family with middle child of 5. Lived with my mom for the first 12 years of my life, and we were homeless and all of that. And so I saw what rock bottom looked like at a very early age. And I just don't ever want to be there. And so I think that in and of itself has kind of lit this fire within me my whole life to just achieve, push, be the best I can be at whatever I am doing. And so I guess that's where the fire came from. That, and my dad always told me, you know, if you're going to do anything, it's worth doing right. And so I would say that's probably where the fire comes from. The second question, my sports are, you know, border cross and bank slalom. I'm a snowboarder. So the best way to describe bank slalom is think of like a slalom course, but with bank turns, you know, and we're essentially doing the same thing a slalom skier would, but we utilize banks to really generate speed, you know, and just like a slalom skier, the goal is to turn, but to generate speed from top to bottom, never scrubbing any of it off if you can avoid it. Pretty simple, basic, you against the clock, fastest time wins. And then you've got border cross, which is by far my favorite. I really like getting in the gates next to people. Think of motocross racing, but on snow and on snowboard. So we have a course that we race down. It's got big berms, it's got whoops, it's got jumps. It's got pretty much any feature you would see on the mountain, but in a course. And so we have a time trial to kind of seat you into brackets. And then from there, you race either head to head, depending on the track, or you race up to 3 other people. First one of the bottom wins. So you advance till you get to that gold medal round, or we call it the big final. If you don't make the big final, you're in 6 through 10 slots, then you're in the small final. So again, first one at the bottom, you're racing. It's, there's a little bit of rubbing once in a while. If you've ever seen Days of Thunder, he didn't push you, he didn't hit you, he didn't bump you, he rubbed you. Rubbin's racing, so we're right next to each other, hitting jumps and just kind of sending it. It's kind of like the NASCAR of the snowboarding world.
What has there been an evolution in that? So like back in 2014, right? That was the first time that snowboard was in the Paralympics. But that was that border cross, but it was just one of you on the course at a time?
So yeah, in 2014, we were calling it border cross because it essentially was a border cross course. It had all the features you would see in a border cross course. However, we were racing time trial. There wasn't enough data to really give us the opportunity to race head to head or side by side. We call it shoulder to shoulder, let alone 4-4 across. We had actually the sport had cut out a couple different categories and just had it as lower limb impairment. So there was no, it was AKs versus BKs versus CP versus MS. We were all in the same category, which in my opinion was a bit unfair for those that had a little bit more limitations. Or more impairment, if you will. So that was one thing, trying to get the data for the IPC so that we could expand the sport down the road. We were only allowed to do time trial. We had done exhibition races at World Championship to prove that we could race head to head or side by side or whatever you want to call it. We had done the exhibition race at X Games in 2012. Again, another kind of proving ground. And as I think you would probably remember, that's the gnarliest course out there, period. Big old jumps. So we had it in us, but the raw data wasn't there yet. And it was only border cross. So we were calling it border cross, but it really was just a time trial event and no head-to-head racing. But now, I mean, we've grown into 2 different disciplines, potentially 3. We'll see how it goes at this World Champs for numbers and multiple categories, which we're constantly.
What would the third one be?
So dual bank slalom. So essentially a bank slalom course that matches and you race either side and then you switch and you race the other side. So it's essentially a head-to-head match, but 2 people on essentially separate courses that are mirroring each other. It's pretty cool to watch. We did it at the last World Championships last year in Norway, and it's really exciting. It makes for some really eventful racing.
It's interesting because you talk about creating the data and you talk about, presenting that to the IPC, the International Paralympic Committee. The snowboarders have been responsible for getting their sport into the games. I mean, you guys grew organically from a group that really felt responsible for that sport. I mean, you guys pushed it forward to a point where then you could step into the Paralympics. What does that mean as a competitor and as a supporter? I mean, it seems like there's this family sort of aspect, but yet you're going head to head with those people.
Yeah, I mean, so I can't speak for the Alpine side. I'm not an Alpine racer, but I know on the snowboard side, there is a ton of camaraderie. If you're not on the podium, you're cheering for everybody else. And it's just that simple. A lot of us have been around for a long time. I'm fortunate to be one of the last. Myself and Evan Strong are actually the last 2 from the very beginning. Evan's taken a year off here and there, where I've muscled through injuries and my own mental capacity, I guess you could say. I've muscled through that to be able to compete every season since I've started. But to see it grow, I mean, you really do. I mean, it feels like it's kind of like your child, and you're right. It was a small group. I think the first sanctioned World Cup was my first competition, and that was actually held by the World Snowboard Federation. It was kind of a smaller organization that kind of does some stuff in conjunction with FIS. But they're much smaller, and we got a chance to compete under them essentially sanctioning us, and there were 17 of us. And I think a couple of them were mono skiers at the time too. I mean, Ravi Drugan showed up, I believe, and another guy from Idaho, drawing a blank at the moment. But there were a couple mono skiers helping us just fill those numbers, and to see it grow in just a couple of years from 17 people from around the world to actually having enough countries, both men and women, and impairment categories to actually push it into the games was crazy. And to see where it's grown to today, it's like I said, it just kind of feels like it's our baby. And oh man, it makes me proud, but I also feel like there's a ton of work to be done still, you know. And I work tirelessly on the political side, advocating for the athletes, for our rights, for, you know, rules and all that stuff, because I just want to see it be around long after I'm gone.
You mentioned Evan Strong. You, Evan, and Mike Shea at the first games were on the podium. So all three Americans, 1, 2, 3. You getting to see it on the big stage. What was it like to see it on the big stage, but then also go and win on the big stage and have your closest teammates, the people who help you help the sport get to this point? What was that like?
And I mean, every time I get a chance to talk about it, I always get chills. You know, it's one of those things, like, you never want to lose a race, obviously, but if you're going to lose, you kind of hope it's to a teammate at the end of the day. At least I do. I want to see American flags all the way around. So it was cool. It was something that we had, you know, swept the podium a few times in World Cups leading up to that. And so it was something that we knew was possible, but it wasn't something that we really talked about or like, let's go sweep it or anything like that. It was just how it shook out. And then when we all realized at the podium ceremony, it was like 3 flags went up, you know, and for a Russian color guard saluting American flags. And I have a picture, I posted it a little while back because it just like came up in my memories on my phone, and I was like, oh, I gotta post this, because it's something that, especially in this day and age politically, like, you would never see or expect to see. And so I don't know, just a super big, like, really proud moment, you know. I mean, I get kind of choked up and lost for words when I think about it, because it was so cool. It's just something that we made history in multiple ways that day.
You really did. And it was such an amazing start. What was it like? What have you seen being in 3 Paralympic Games? Because that was the first. And that's where you said you were really time trialing. But then in the snowboard, you've been able to go, like Pyeongchang, was it dual in Pyeongchang, the snowboard? And then what was the situation in Beijing? Are you getting at the Paralympic Games? Are you getting to have 4 of you on a course at the same time, which I'd imagine for you is the ultimate, is what you're supposed to do?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think border cross to me is 4 across at least. X Games, you have 6. So, I mean, a minimum of 4 is kind of, to me, the basic standard. So yeah, Pyeongchang, we raced head to head, and that was crazy day. I mean, we had gate malfunctions and all kinds of stuff. So to add that to racing side by side with people and the sun going down and no lights to accommodate the sun going down, we weren't prepared. We were never supposed to be racing in the dark, so we had to get it done. It's crazy, you know. And head to head, you have more when you're just racing 2 on a course for border cross. You have more runs because you have to get through the brackets. So say you bracket out top, I don't know, 24, say 16, it's easier numbers, right? I mean, that's 4 runs to the gold medal round. But if you're bracketing out, say, the top 16 and you're going head to head, well, that's 8 runs on top of your 2 time trials to get you seated. So, I mean, you're taking 10 laps down a minute plus course that takes every bit out of you every single lap. So It's definitely different strategically, but it's also, it's single elimination. So it's do or die each round. You got to get through. You got to get through. You got to get through. So to see it grow to where it's supposed to be is a huge point of pride for me. When I see that we have races where it's kind of back to head to head because a course can't accommodate, in my personal opinion, I would say that place should not be hosting a border cross event. And I don't mean to be, kind of hard-headed about it, but that's what the sport is. It is for a cross. You don't see in the able-bodied world, you don't see them racing head-to-head once in a while. It's for a cross, and if a venue can't accommodate, they don't host. And so that's kind of like a big point of pride is we've pushed it to a point where it's supposed to be. So let's keep it going. I always feel like if we're taking step backs, those are just steps back sometimes. So yeah, I don't know. At Beijing, we did get to race for a cross, and most of the time it is for a cross. Very rarely is it a head-to-head race versus for a cross, and it's just so much more exciting. I got the whole shot in every one of my heats at Beijing, and I ended up getting put into the small final because down below I made a mistake and ended up getting past. So that's kind of the fun thing about it is it's really anyone's race until that finish line is crossed. It's not a guaranteed, oh, these two guys are gonna move on. It's like really anybody can catch up. All it takes is one little mistake.
What's your training like? I mean, I think both on snow and off snow, because it's the sprint. You talk about the whole shot, right? That's your start where you're pulling on the bars to get out. And if you get the whole shot, you're in that prime position. It's harder for people to pass you. That's obviously one part of your training has to be that upper body part. But then there's the boarding part. And then you talk about the endurance of doing multiple runs. And it gets more and more important as you get further along in those runs. So you've got to be at your best when you're potentially most tired. How do you train for that?
We train year round. I think any professional athlete really does. You might get a little bit of downtime here and there, but my whole life is surrounded by activity. Yeah, I'm a very active person. I don't sit still for a very long period of time anyway. So in the summer, it's primarily mountain biking. I do everything from, climbing uphill on my mountain bike to riding a lot of downhill. That's very similar to what we do especially in border cross. And it's much higher risk. So you got to be that much more precise on a mountain bike. And then once the snow starts flying and I can't have, the rubber on the trails, I'm riding a stationary bike. So that covers a lot of my cardio. I train generally, especially outside of this season, 4 to 5 days a week doing jujitsu. You want to talk about cardio, roll around for an hour with other grown people, whether it's men or women, in or out of a gi and put the puzzle together while they're cutting your oxygen supply or trying to break your arm. I mean, talk about cardio intensive. Plus putting puzzles together while someone's trying to pop your head off. I mean, it makes everything in life, including standing in a start gate at the games, seem not so serious, I guess. Or, I don't know. It takes a lot of pressure off, to be honest. And then I do a lot of kettlebell workouts. I use a TRX. I do a lot of balance stuff. I think it's really important to be able to separate your lower body from your upper body. I do the voodoo board while I juggle and like just random weird things that like really make both parts of the brain have to think. But you're right, we have to have upper body strength. We have to have a really strong core, and then our legs have to be fit. And then on top of all that, you got to be cardio intensive. You got to be ready to go.
Because it's a sprint. I mean, it's a 1 minute sprint effectively, but it's a 1 minute sprint. And then you take a chairlift up and then, or maybe you take a snowmobile up depending upon the venue, but then you have to get right back at it. So it's that sprint, then it's another sprint, then it's another sprint. So it's the anaerobic and the aerobic all at the same time. And you mentioned the sense of the adrenaline, but also the danger, and that one little move, this is your riding mountain bike downhill, can be dire, right? I mean, can be your race, can be, but also can be potential injury. I mean, some of the jumps you guys are going off of are big jumps where battling back and forth, rubbing, that can be really, really challenging. Is the mental side, is it the jujitsu that really is the mental side of the competition for you?
So you're right. I mean, hitting big jumps can be catastrophic, regardless of what you're piloting, whether it be skis or snowboard or mountain bike, whatever. Especially when you throw other aspects of, say, pressure that you're putting on yourself or someone else has put on you, or maybe there's people right next to you. So yeah, it can definitely be very dangerous, very catastrophic, if things don't go your way. But the mental side of it, years ago, I started, meditating and doing yoga and all that stuff because I was burnt out. I was over it. I didn't want to do it anymore. And on top of that, I was tired of feeling so stressed from everything. And that just wears on you. I mean, you were a career competitor, it can really, that can be what makes or breaks a season or a race for someone, even a career sometimes. So I had, a coach of mine, Maya Wheeler, he's been a big mentor of mine, and he was always big into sports psych world and all of that. And when he was coaching us, that was one of his big things was, we can make you a well-oiled machine, but if the computer chips aren't firing how they're supposed to be, it's going to all fall apart when it matters most. And so he started suggesting certain types of meditation, certain types of yoga. And then, I just took it to the next level, tons of breath work, all of that. And then getting into jujitsu later on, it was something, I wrestled in high school and wasn't a great wrestler or anything, but I always liked it. And it was something that I had pushed against to do the whole jujitsu thing, primarily because it is dangerous. It's a combat sport. You can get hurt any given day of the week. But it's also like very adrenaline intensive and very cardio intensive. And I had a feeling I would kind of get hooked on it, which I did. But it really has, in some ways, kind of humbled me in a way that nothing else has ever been able to, because you realize, like, on any given day, you might think you're bad, but there's always someone who's way badder, and honestly, I mean, literally someone putting a choke on you, and you've got to like calm everything down and try to do your best to breathe through it and figure out how to get out of that choke before you black out. Essentially, it's a puzzle, and it's something that, like, it really takes a lot of stress out of the rest of life. It makes everything seem less stressful. And then the final piece of it is if you can't get out, you've got to tap. And nothing feels worse than having to tap to someone, especially if you're like, well, I don't think that person's really better than me. Like, I shouldn't have had to tap to them, but they caught me. And it's so humbling. And there's moments where you get frustrated and you just have to swallow your pride and realize, like, you're going to get some people are going to get you, and you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, kind of deal. And it really does take a lot of stress out of everything else in life, because it's the most stressful thing I put myself through, guaranteed.
Have you blacked out? Because that's, I mean, I've heard people like MMA people talk about the idea of, like, you do get choked out, and it's not that you're dying, but you get choked out, you black out, and you come back, which to the layperson sounds absolutely crazy. Have you gone to that point?
I've never gotten completely choked out. I'm smart enough to tap. I have seen spots, and I will push. I push certain chokes, especially like if you have an armbar or something, I'll tap immediately. Or if you have a leg lock, I've only got one good ankle. I've only got one ankle. So, and I've only got one halfway okay knee. So like you got a leg lock or an ankle lock on me, I'm tapping immediately, even before you can wrench on it, because I cannot afford to have things just torn and busted. So, same with shoulder locks and that kind of stuff. But chokes, I have a buddy actually a buddy who taught me into it, finally talked me into doing jujitsu, got us a private here at Aspen MMA. And I told him, no, 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 no. And he's like, I got us a private, you're coming. Did it, fell in love with it, asked him if the professor was like legit. And he was like, that guy's legit. He knows way more than he leads on, and he'll teach you all the ways. But my buddy Shane, what he taught me was you can actually build somewhat of a tolerance to chokes. It comes with time, people cutting your carotid arteries and your oxygen supply over time, so you can push it. There is a fine line, you'll start to see the spots, and if you can get out, you can get out. If you can't, you better tap. But I've never been fully choked out. Like I said, there's only been one or two where I was like, oh crap, they're actually choking me. I'm seeing spots right now. And I had to tap immediately. But generally you can kind of feel it happening, and you realize what's going on and realize you're probably not going to get out. So you just get out, let me go kind of thing. But I try to build that tolerance a little bit to it. I don't know how true that is, to be honest. So anybody out there listening, don't take advice from me on this, because I don't know if you can actually build a tolerance. It's just what Shane told me. And I feel like over time, I've been able to really flex that neck and this is the move, really take away the neck completely. But I mean, yeah, there's a little bit. I've never been choked out though.
It's cool to see the evolution for you, right? And the evolution in your training, where jujitsu becomes a part of it, where meditation becomes a part of it. What did snowboarding mean to you after losing your foot? Because that had to be pretty traumatic for you, right? And you were a snowboarder before too.
Yeah, so I mean, snowboarding is everything. It's my church. I always say this. Anybody who's ever heard me speak in the last 12 years, and I said it even before then, where are you going to get closer to God than 10 to 12,000 feet up in the mountains, in the wilderness, being one with nature, expressing yourself? Who's to stop you? You hear the pow hounds out there, right? Like, it's church. And it really is. It's what saved my life multiple times. When I went and lived with my dad when I was 12, I started on skis. He literally picked me up from the airport and took me straight to Deer Valley. Put skis on my feet that day. He didn't know what to do with this rambunctious, no holds barred kid that had no structure and a ton of energy. He's like, I don't know what to do with this kid. So he put skis on my feet. And I instantly fell in love with it. And then later I switched to snowboarding, and it's just always been kind of like my one outlet. And so going over like the amputation thing, I was involved in an industrial accident, and all this crazy stuff happened that led up to potentially partial limb salvage of my foot, or just kind of amputation. And so when I was in there talking to the doctors, they were like, you got those two options. Those are what it looks like. And I said, all right, well, how long till I can snowboard again? That was literally the question. It's what kind of dictated everything. And my doctor said, if we try the partial limb salvage, I had 3 dead toes, and I was headed towards gangrene. They said, if you do that, you're looking at maybe, if ever, 10 years from now, but you're going to be living a very painful life. Like, 5-6 surgeries down the road, if everything doesn't work, we're going to have to amputate anyway. And that's if gangrene hasn't set in. So we could end up chasing that to your hip if it doesn't kill you. So I said, all right, how long till I can snowboard if we just, cut to the chase and amputate? And this is 2005. I'm a little bit old. I'm getting up in there. To our young listeners, 2005, it's the height of the Iraq war. So, the government's dumping a ton of technology into lower limb prosthetics. And I would say that below the knee amputees, we're kind of at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to technology. And, in all reality, we can get away with walking on a peg if we have to. So technology up until that point wasn't great. And so my doctor, he was telling me, technology is awesome these days. You've got a great attitude, you're healthy. I could see you living a normal life with a prosthetic no longer than 3 years. You'll be back to snowboarding, you'll be back to doing whatever you did before, but it'll be the prosthetic. I was like, okay, it's July now. Opening days in October, Brighton Resort back when they opened on Halloween Day. Like, how about 3 months? He's like, man, whatever's going to make you make the right decision. They wanted me to amputate, but I was an adult and they couldn't just say, hey, you should chop this off. They had to kind of weigh the options for me.
Who else was involved in that decision? Were you just making it yourself?
Yeah, just me and my doctor.
Really?
Yeah, so I had an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. James Morgan. He just retired this time last year, but he was one of the few who was doing the Ertl procedure outside of the military, which is where they fuse the tib fib together. And so since I was just a foot injury, they had, at the time, in order to fit decent technology under me, they had to take me up about mid calf. But parts of my foot were still salvageable. So they actually did my Ertl procedure with my heel bone. So they used my heel bone and kind of fused those two together, and then took my Achilles tendon and padded that because that was still good. And so, I still have original parts from my original foot in my leg. It's just up quite a bit higher.
That is, and so 3 months, did you make it? Did you make it for opening day?
Yeah, it was crazy. I went out there and it's so funny, man. Like, I look back at that day and so I was telling everybody that had a aesthetic ears, I was like, I'm going to snowboard, blah, blah, blah. Like, I just had this amputation because they went in and cut it off like less than a week later. Right. And I'm telling everybody. My dad's like, yeah, man, that's a cool goal, but don't be bummed if it doesn't happen. I'm like, I can't hear that. And then other friends are like, man, that's cool, man. Like, okay, like they're doing one of these, not really wanting to like, they want to support. That's about it. So we get up. It's so funny, we get up to Brighton Resort, and I had one of those temporary new cool parking passes that got you right up to the front. And so we get out there and I'm like, I'm super stoked. Like, I just pulled right up to the snowbank and parked and pulled out my snowboard, and like, dude, my heart started beating, and like I start to feel nervous even talking about it with you, because like it's just pumping, and I'm just like, oh my God, what if everybody who said this wasn't going to happen, what if they're right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? And there was a moment where like I literally must have just stopped, because everybody's like, Keith, you good? And I was like in my own world. And then I kind of came back and I realized where I was, and I was like, dude, it doesn't matter if I can snowboard. Look where we are today. I taught myself how to walk with no physical therapy or rehab. In just a couple of weeks, I was back to driving a manual car, which was like, outside of snowboarding, it was my car that was everything. And
which leg are you missing?
I'm missing my left.
Right. So that's your clutch
Yeah.
leg. Right. Okay.
Turned up a couple clutches in my day. But yeah, I mean, everything kind of hit all at once and came full circle. And I realized, like, it doesn't even matter if I can shred. Like, look at what I've accomplished to get to this point. I got off the pain meds. I went through 2 different sessions of what do you call it, withdrawals. The first, so I was on a ton of pain meds when this all happened. And the first week I quit taking my morning meds, morning and afternoon. And I went through 48 hours worth of withdrawals. The next week I quit taking my evening and night meds, and I went through another 72 hours worth of withdrawals. And after that, I was able to kind of start putting on weight and like eating and drinking again, holding down food. And I was actually starting to get sleep. And so we're kind of off to the races of getting healed up for
What are the withdrawals like? What do you mean?
They're terrible. So I was on opiates. I was on Oxycontin, Percocet. I was on Valium. They had me on morphine. I mean, they had me on everything. And I mean, it's pretty much just synthetic heroin at that point. But they were terrible. I mean, you're hungry, but you can't eat. You're thirsty, but you can't drink. You're tired, but you can't sleep. And all the while your brain's like, just take the pill. Just take the pill. The pain will go away for maybe an hour or two, but at least you won't be in pain. Just take the pill. You won't be puking. You won't be cold sweating, all this other stuff. And so, I mean, they're terrible. I would not wish that on my worst enemy, to be honest with you. Like, it is bad.
And did you know how long it would take to go through you said 48 hours and then 72 hours the second time, which if you know, you kind of go, okay, can I gut it out for 48 hours? Maybe I can gut it out for 48 hours. Can I gut it out for 72? Maybe I can do that. But this is that indeterminate finish line though, too, right? You never know when you're done.
Absolutely. And I wasn't expecting the withdrawals the second time. The first time I was like, okay, this might be rough. Like, I kind of read up on it. My doctors had mentioned it to me because the pain actually got worse after the amputation. And they were like, we think your body's kind of addicted to this substance. It's saying send help, essentially. And so creating the pain, the pain sensors, they're going crazy. So send help to get the chemical kind of deal. And so I expected it the first time. The second time I really didn't. And I flushed 580 OxyContin 80s, which I probably messed up an entire water system doing that. I didn't realize at the time what I just dumped them down the toilet. But I mean, that's an absurd amount of OxyContin for anybody, let alone, you know, a 20-year-old, 21-year-old, whatever.
Yeah, it's a street value too, right? I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah, crazy, right? But honestly, look, I'll die with a clean conscience knowing I didn't give those to anybody. That's fine with me. But yeah, I mean, could you imagine? So generally speaking, you know, a Percocet 10 is a tenth of what an 80 is, if that gives you an idea of how strong these pills are. At least that's how it was explained to me. I'm no pharmacist or anything, but I mean, I flushed them, and there was about 48 hours in. I wish I hadn't, to be honest. And I'm really glad I did now, because if they had been in my position, I can't guarantee I would have made it through that next 24 hours, because it was just so painful. I mean, I was convulsing at times, and you know, it's just bad. It's just really, really
Did you have
bad.
to lock yourself up too? Were you just locked in so you couldn't go out, you couldn't find more pills or whatever? Because I mean, opioids are so addictive, right? I
They
mean, it's
really are.
amazing.
And this was during that whole opioid crisis that we all now look back on, you know, 15 years later going, holy crap. And so it was during that time. You know, I lived in Hiram, Utah. So I lived in a small town kind of out in the middle of nowhere, just outside of Logan. So it wasn't like I could just, I'm from Ogden, so it's not like I could just go down to 25th Street and find somebody, to be honest. And the second one, I couldn't really get out of my house without puking anyway. I couldn't stand up without getting dizzy. You know, it was, so I lived by myself, so that was kind of a good thing. Yeah, it wasn't like I had a whole lot of options anyway. Granted, like I said, if I would have had them in my possession, I probably would have taken them, you know. But it was that thought of we're getting back on a snowboard. We're going to be able to go back to church. That was like the one little gem I was holding on to. And it was like one thing I was like, it doesn't matter what happens if I live through this. At that time, I thought I was dying. I felt like I was dying. I didn't know you don't actually die from withdrawals from opium or opioids. But I mean, I felt like I was dying, and it was just what I was holding on to. I was like, if I can get through this, I'll be able to snowboard again. If I can snowboard, I can live. And that little gem, that little thought of like getting back to the mountain, you know, maybe just making one slash of POW, just anything, riding through the trees, even just being at the top of the world. Like, that's one of those things that just the thought of it was enough for me to kind of just hold on and you know, say my prayers, if you will, and get through it.
But it is that too, isn't it? That what's the story that you tell yourself when things are really difficult? How do you keep going?
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, you look back on it and like we all go through stuff, and it's a series of moments and a series of stories, and things can be better or worse just based on your narrative of how things are going down. Um, and I literally was just telling myself over and over and over, like, snowboarding, it's coming, it's coming. And that was like I guess the little story, the little narrative I had to tell myself. And then getting back on a leg was a challenge in and of itself, being patient and making sure my leg healed properly. And then getting into a prosthetic finally, and like being able to like teach myself how to bear weight on it and move from, doing the whole crutching while walking around to ditching one crutch and realizing that's just as much of a hindrance as two. So learning to limp and just deal with the pain, and I just realized it's like, well, it's painful to walk on this, but it was way more painful to get my foot crushed. That was the narrative. It was like snowboarding, it's right around the corner. We're gonna go snowboarding.
What's the story that you tell yourself in the start now? Because you are snowboarding.
So, I mean, in the start, generally, I mean, it's just ride fast, ride smooth, get out in front. I think there's some things I tell myself that I'm not ready to share with the world to be able to pull with that extra little oomph or anger, if you will. Um, but there was a time where a lot of what I was going through and dealing with, or a lot of my success was kind of somewhat out of spite, just to prove the world that I was better than people had thought of me, and that I was capable of doing something great. And it was literally like, I'll show them. Every poll, it was, I'll show them, and that can kind of be a bit of a distraction. So I've kind of changed the tune a little bit. But realistically, I mean, I try to have fun. I try to have fun, especially at a race, because if I'm having fun, I'm racing well. And I've kind of changed the tune of like, I've got a cool life, man. I really do, and I'm lucky to be alive. I bled to death 3 separate times. The third time I was gone for 3 minutes. I shouldn't be here having this conversation, let alone be a professional snowboarder. So
This is post getting your foot broken that you bled to death.
this was while I was in the hospital. So they cut a hole in the top of my foot to do the reconstructive surgery and emergency fasciotomy. They drained 96 fluid ounces of blood out of my foot originally. So that hole, anytime I'd sit up past like a 45-degree angle, all the blood would go rushing down to my foot and come geysering out of that hole. Yeah. And it feels about that look on your face.
Oh no.
Extremely painful. And it might be why I lost circulation in my foot in the first place. So that happened 3 different times. And, the first time they got me back pretty quick with defibrillator, second time relatively quick defibrillator, and the third time CPR and defibrillator. And they were able to get, it's like in the movies when you're like, okay, they're going to give them one more shot. They did, luckily, and they got a faint pulse. And then from that point on, I was stuck on my back. And then a few weeks later, I lost circulation in my foot. About a month down the road, they're like, hey, we need to decide what we're going to do with this. So my tune these days when I'm snowboarding is like, yeah, I want to win. I'm super competitive, but I'm also there snowboarding with my friends. Some of these people I consider my family. I've watched every single person start their career on the World Cup circuit and NORAM and Europa Cup circuit at this point. I've watched every single athlete start their career, and I take that in almost every race. I take a moment. I'm just like, this is so cool. Like, look at where we are. Look at where you started, and look at where you are, man. And like, even on a bad day when I'm not performing well, yeah, I'm disappointed if I don't end up on the podium or whatever. But I always have to remember, like, I'm out there snowboarding with my friends and a second family, and like, I take a point of pride in that. Like, there's a point of pride for me to know that I've seen these people start and excel and be some of my biggest competitors now. And it's joy, it's love.
Is it a second life in some ways? I mean, it's kind of like you died. In some ways, you died and were brought back. I mean, this is the definition of the phoenix in some ways, right?
Sure.
And you get to do it again
Yeah.
with the knowledge that you had from the previous life, right?
Yeah. And I mean, so it was a humbling experience for sure. I mean, I was pretty successful in the drilling world. I was a well driller. I drilled for water, and they were grooming me to take this company over. And the plan was to hand the keys to the kingdom by the age of 30. That was my path. And there were some instances where I was very arrogant with life in general. I mean, I was somewhat careless. I mean, the accident was somewhat of a careless accident as well, to be honest. I mean, my load was a little bit heavy and I was actually just loading trailers, but there were days where you'd have to climb, you know, a 70 or 100-foot derrick and wrench on things. And it was much more convenient to just climb up there without a lineman's belt, a safety harness, than it was to harness, climb, just to fix a bolt or something. And looking back on it, I mean, those things would sway in the wind and you'd be sitting up there just wrenching away, like not even thinking about it. And I would say there was a point where I was a little careless for sure. And there was a point where I didn't really care what happened to me. And I don't know. I definitely, it humbled me in ways that I can't really describe, because it made me want to make the most out of every minute. It made me, try to seize the day regardless of what I'm doing. Even when I'm hanging out with my son, like, we might not even leave the house, but we're seizing every moment. We're working on things. I'm pushing him to learn things alphabetically, or his arithmetics, or we're building stuff, and it's always something, right? I get a lot out of that. I get these little moments of just pride where it's like it is a second lease on life. And then of course add the snowboard world, and I live in an amazing place and I have an amazing wife, and we have our other business and all these other things. And I'm just, it's that second gift. It's, the first gift is life in and of itself, and the second one is, well, you're back. You get to see it in a different light, which I didn't see it at that age. When all that happened, before that happened, I didn't see it as life as a gift. I saw life as kind of a burden. And maybe this is what I needed to kind of wise me up a bit, to really appreciate what Mother Earth is and what it has to offer, and what a gift it really is to be alive.
It sounds like in some ways that this is the third stage for you, that you've gone from, the carefree, possibly careless young guy, to recovering, coming back from the dead, to now bringing life into this world, and being a husband and being a father and sharing that knowledge. But then your son also, he became a star during the coverage of the games. I mean, how do you compete with this? You thought you were the big man in the house, and you might be getting upstaged by the little guy.
Oh, I'm constantly getting upstaged by this kid. He is a little rock star for sure. And it's so funny, like, man, this kid, he's got more talent in his pinky than I think I'll ever have. I mean, he was walking pretty young. The kid pedals a bike at 3.5. He was jumping his strider bike at the Pro BMX park. Like, for us, it's just damage control with this kid, because he's, like I said, he's got more talent than I could have ever hoped to have or pass along to anyone. And all due credit to his mom, who was a career gymnast, and in her own right, she was a national champion in gymnastics. So I'm guessing a lot of the genes came from her, especially the balance stuff. But snowboarding, I mean, the kid's on snowboard. He's on a snowboard already, and he can turn it both directions. He can stop it. I mean, he's going to start skiing pretty soon. And he's definitely going to probably upstage me. He's very competitive, I've realized. And I just try to not be competitive with him and be like, look, dude, I'm not the guy you got to compete against. There's going to be plenty of that. Like, let's just hang, man. But yeah, it's definitely, it's so cool to see a little human kind of, I guess, follow these little things that you do. I mean, and it makes sense that he's a rock star on a bike. We've been taking him to the bike park since he was born. It's something my wife and I have always loved to do, is go up to the bike park over at Snowmass. And he's just a little infant, and we'd pass him off, yeah, I'd go take a lap and then come down and take him and go take a lap. And so he's been around bikes his whole life. Which, if he ends up being a professional mountain biker or something, that is all good with us. I'm totally ready to spend time in warm weather in cool places. I'm happy with that. But yeah, I mean,
as the pit crew.
Yeah, totally. I'll work on bikes all day. I have no problem with it. I'm good with my hands. But he really is just like the joy of our life. And I think I would definitely be lost without him. I think my wife would be too. He's a little rock star. He's great personality and lover boy. And he just, he loves everybody and smart and super coordinated, and adventurous. So, but like I said, damage control with this kid. We put a full face helmet on him, pad him up as best we can. But even then, he's a little bit of a purist. He's like, I don't want those elbow pads. I don't want knee pads. I'm like, dude, your knees are all scraped up already. Let's preserve what we've got. And he's like, okay. But he's definitely a purist extreme sports kid already.
And how old is he?
3.5.
3.5.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. But I can't. Here's the thing. Either you deal with a kid that's melting down, or you just pat him up. And so we just pat him up, because it's easier to let a kid drop in on a pump track or something. You just kind of, as a parent, you're like, okay, here we go, kind of thing. Better get the camera ready. Than to have a kid that's screaming in your face and really, really upset that you didn't let him drop in with the other kids.
I would imagine that being a parent, because you do extreme sports, and your wife did extreme sports, I mean, and probably continues to. You're talking about the biking and everything, but like looking at what gymnasts do, like it looks so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But if it goes wrong, it can go really, really wrong. But I imagine for the two of you, even though you have this personal experience, watching your child has to be way harder, because you have no control. You're just there as support, right?
That's just it. What I do on a snowboard, everyone's like, that's psycho, that's crazy. And like, you ski downhill, what it's like. It's a calculated risk. Every movement, every motion, every turn, everything is calculated, and you're in control. But what you just said it's just that. Like, I watch this kid and I'm like, I'm not in control, and I'm just like, I hope it works out for the best, because he's gonna do it either way. I just have no way of like turning the handlebars for him. I just hope that he's watched and learned enough to be able to do it. But I mean, he's pretty talented. I've seen the kid ride through some things and I was like, oh no, this is going to be bad. And then he rides out and I'm like, okay, well, that worked. And each time he gets a little better and a little better. And so he's figuring out, his own calculations and that kind of thing. And I think that's part of it, is we all have to take that risk in order to learn how to do it properly and how to gauge, so to speak.
But taking that risk, especially as a parent, taking the risk part is being willing to watch him crash, being willing to watch him fail. That's got to be way harder than failing or crashing yourself.
Oh yeah. I mean, when your kid crashes and then they cry, you feel really bad for them. And I'm like, I know how that feels. Like, I don't like having a skinned knee. You definitely wouldn't either. But that's part of parenting, is like, I'm a firm believer in letting kids experience life. And it's why we live where we live, is we believe in and love the great outdoors. And it's I think there's a level of toughness that comes with all of that. I was an outdoor kid. I had to learn from my own experiences, and can't say it's always going to go right for him, but I would rather him experience life to the fullest and take his own risks as he gets older and know how to handle those and how to bounce back than you know, being a kid that sits indoors and plays video games all day and has no idea how to handle life. I think there's a lot of life lessons that comes with crashes and how to, like I said, bounce back. It's a good skill to have, especially in this day and age. Life isn't friendly. It's not easy.
No, it's not friendly, but that's one of those things that makes more sense in some ways in hindsight than it does in foresight. Like knowing, okay, the kid's going to crash, he's going to hurt himself, he's going to come back. That is part of learning. You know, the mental part of it, you know, you're thinking, okay, I understand how this is supposed to go, but at the same time, just it shows an amazing amount of strength to be able to say, yes, go ahead and go crash because you have to in order to go forward.
Well, if they don't crash now, they're going to later. It's just a matter of it's not a matter of if, but when, right? Regardless if you're talking metaphorically or physically crashing something. And are they going to be able to have the mental capacity to be able to bounce back? And if so, how long is that going to take? And I think all of these little experiences come with that. And it's very hard to have restraint as a parent to not run over there and be like, no. You know, it's more like you run over there and go, no, try it this way, you know, like, or maybe let's drop from halfway up first, you know. You try to control it as much as you can. Like I said, it's damage control. You try to control the little pieces as much as you can, knowing that there's not a whole lot that's in your control.
Right. And that there are necessary steps along the way to personal strength, to success, and to the confidence. You know, so often people talk about they're successful because they're confident. Well, the question that comes from that is, why are you confident? And what it sounds like is you are building a confident child.
Sure hope so. I sure hope so. He seems to be, from what I can tell. There's no lack of confidence from this child.
That is awesome. Well, I think we should finish on this now. We actually had a direct message during this from Lori Fisher, who said that thank you for living your life with authenticity. And I think that seems like the most appropriate ending to this. So thank you for living your life with authenticity and continuing to move forward and hopefully completing your set, getting that gold medal to complete your set in Cortina. So thank you, Keith.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. The greatest gift you can give us is to tell your friends and, you know, share it. We will also make this into a traditional podcast. We would love for you to subscribe. Then you will get an alert when we have a podcast, and you know that it's been great stuff. So like us, follow us, subscribe, and please, we will bring you another great episode next week. So thank you all. Thank you, Keith, and we'll see you next time.